All right, the March 11th Istio meeting. We have just friendly reminder, 10 days till the start of KubeCon, give or take. So hopefully you all are enjoying your last minute slide panics like I am. We've got a pretty full agenda for the meeting today, so I'm just going to have us jump right into it. We have a question from Conrad regarding exclude namespaces. I don't see Conrad. Oh, there might be. Conrad, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Do you want to kind of walk us through this?
Yeah, definitely. So within the CNI implementation, we have a sort of, I don't know if legacy is the right term, but upon the initial implementation of the CNI, there was this exclude namespaces piece of configuration that you could list a set of namespaces that should be excluded from CNI processing. And essentially, this would short circuit the CNI plugin from actually processing the namespace. So pods in that excluded namespace would become ready immediately. And we've encountered some issues with this configuration now that the CNI has, the implementation has changed into this two-part system where we have the CNI agent and the CNI plugin. The CNI agent sends messages to the CNI agent to then process and enroll pods in the mesh. So essentially, an edge case was encountered where the exclude namespaces is respected by the plugin right now, but the CNI agent has no awareness of exclude namespaces. So we still have this avenue of pods within an excluded namespace still being able to be enrolled in the mesh. And this is supported by documentation right now. But essentially, there's an edge case in this implementation gap where if there's a Cube API server disconnect when pods are added to the mesh in an excluded namespace, the CNI agent would not be aware of those pods. And when connectivity is restored to the API server, we have no logic within the CNI agent to actually rediscover these added pods during the disconnectivity situation. So really, I wanted to bring up the conversation around adding the logic to the CNI agent to respect exclude namespaces and see about the temperature in the room on this type of behavior. And essentially, this would mean that no matter if a pod is labeled to be included in the mesh, if the pod lives in an excluded namespace, it could never be added to the mesh. And this would sort of align the expectations and behavior of exclude namespaces so that this type of edge case doesn't happen in the first place, and then that the CNI implementation respects this exclude namespaces just functionality in general.
Does this happen on an update to a pod in an excluded namespace too? Like if you, like would the actual agent pick up on that change and then not exclude it?
Correct.
Even though the binary, or the actual binary would exclude it? Because it still watches for updates and deletes, I think, but it relies on, I believe it relies on the binary for creation or add events.
Yeah, that understanding is correct. So if a pod were to be updated, then the agent would pick up that pod event and reconcile it properly. So if the pod were to be added in that disconnect time frame, and then the pod would later on updated after API server connectivity is restored, then it would properly enroll it in the mesh.
I mean, does it even need the API server disconnect? To me, it almost seemed like it could happen just on an update of a pod that's in an excluded namespace?
So if the API server was still disconnected, then
We're still connected. I think.
Yeah, if it was connected to the API server, then the flow should be fine
Okay.
in that regard.
I mean, to me, this update makes sense. And again, this is specific to ambient, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. To me, this makes sense, unless we've explicitly documented that we don't support exclude namespace in the CNI for ambient mode, which I don't think we've done. In that case, I would say we could just remove it from the binary check, but I don't think we've done that. So I think it makes sense to have the same support in the actual agent as well.
Okay. Does anyone else have opinions on this? Anyone against adding it? Support for excluded namespaces in the CNI agent?
No, it makes sense. I think there might be some like things we can discuss in the PR of like how this might conflict with any labels or whatnot, and what takes precedence, but we can discuss that in the PR.
Alrighty, sounds good.
Cool. Thanks for bringing this up.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Thanks, Conrad. Stephen has a question about our domain registrar.
Yeah, I don't think he can join, or unless he's here and I'm just talking over him. But yeah, I think he just had a question.
Not seeing any hands fly up. I know I don't. Keith?
Yeah, I've got context here. We're trying to do, Steven's trying to do the, what is it, the GCR registry redirection stuff and move DNS over to Cloudflare in order to make that happen. It looks like the istio.io domain is not registered via GCP, but instead via one API. And that information doesn't seem to be anywhere. I suspect maybe it's in like, what's the Google key thing called? Valentine or whatever. It might be in the, I'd imagine it's probably somewhere Google based if we need to log in to do the domain transfer. But I just don't have any context on the service. So the ask is just if anybody knows about this, please let us know.
Have we reached out to Craig about this?
No, we just found out about it yesterday. But
Okay, I'll touch base with him.
can.
He tends to know where all that sort of stuff is hidden, and I've got a thread already going with him, so I'll check with him.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Next up, Mike with Service Scope and Single Network.
Hey folks, we are starting to work on single network multi-cluster, and there is an issue that I wanted to bring up. I brought it up before, but we didn't really reach any conclusions, and now another opportunity to discuss it. So basically, we have an issue that affects a single network multi-cluster, specifically where if you have a service that is, for example, local everywhere, but it uses a waypoint that for some reason marked as global, the request under some circumstances that targets a local service can be sent to a remote cluster through that global waypoint, which is a bug, essentially. We don't want this behavior. And one way to fix this behavior is to let the tunnels know what is the actual scope of the service, so that when it selects a waypoint endpoint, it can check with the service scope and exclude waypoints that don't match that scope. There was a PR proposing some WDS change, but another thing that I wanted to bring for the discussion here before pushing for that change is, do we want to allow service scope to be configured differently in different clusters? Because if we allow that, just letting the tunnel know the scope of the service, whether it's global or local, wouldn't be enough. We actually needed to know where exactly it's global. Like we will have to send it a list of clusters. And we brought up some similar suggestions before in different contexts, and there was a bit of pushback on adding a list of clusters to WDS. So I wanted to discuss it here and hear what are the concerns with this. There are some alternatives that I listed there. For example, we can keep the current stance that we don't support different service scopes for the same service in different clusters. That's basically what we documented right now. We could, as I suggested, just send over WDS to the tunnels the list of clusters where the service is global, and therefore the clusters where we can discover endpoints of that service. There is also a potential to just change how we do endpoints lookup in the tunnel. Like currently we have this two-level system where we first look up a service, checks whether the service uses a waypoint, and if it does, we pick a waypoint endpoint. But we could potentially change it and say remove this level of indirection and just for services that use a waypoint directly populate the endpoints with waypoint endpoints and exclude those that don't match the service scope. I don't know if it's going to be winning in terms of actual churn and if something in the mesh changes, but that's also another alternative here. I think Ian asked the question. Sorry. Where's the chat? Here it is.
I can just say it. So I thought we had namespace sameness as an expectation for a multi-cluster, and so the difference would already be kind of like a config error.
Well, we do, but the boundaries of namespace sameness are a little bit sort of fuzzy. It's not immediately clear that namespace sameness apply for service scope in the sense that if you look at the description of the service scope API in the comments, and I linked the bug there or a PR there where there was a discussion, it kind of strongly suggests that service scope is about service endpoints discoverability. And that kind of makes it valid to say that, well, I don't want to discover endpoints in this cluster, but discover endpoints in this cluster, in some other cluster. So we can make an argument that it's subject to namespace sameness, but given that it's not really well-defined concepts, I think it makes sense to also discuss it a little bit if it applies in this particular case.
All right, yeah, I can see it's maybe not super clean cut, and we should discuss.
So it's possible to have the same configuration in multi-network where you have a local service with a global waypoint. Why is it not a problem in multi-network, but it is a problem in single network?
So the specific issue of waypoints sending requests to a remote cluster is not an issue in multi-network because East-West Gateway will abort such a request. Right. In single network, we don't have an East-West Gateway. And just to clarify, I think we, in multi-network scenario, still can do better in the sense that if we know that there is no local waypoint endpoint that we can send to, right? And we know that the service is local, we probably shouldn't send the request in the first place and should just return an error as opposed to like expecting East-West gateway to fail it. But it will fail one way or another in multi-network.
So waypoints send multi-cluster traffic. I guess I'm confused about where the failure happens.
The failure happens is like if you have a service that is local and uses a waypoint, and you have a global waypoint, the tunnel in principle can send for this global waypoint to a remote cluster.
Yep.
Like the waypoint endpoint in the remote cluster, right? That would happen if local waypoint endpoints are not available for some reason. And then in the remote cluster, the waypoint can send to local to the waypoint service endpoint.
But you said something about the east-west gateway will fail it.
But that wouldn't need to go through the east-west gateway in this case, right? The request to the waypoint will pass through the east-west gateway, right? But then in the remote cluster, waypoint can like just keep the request in the remote cluster.
That
right?
sounds
And
successful.
well, that sounds like we send a request for a service that's supposed to be local everywhere to a remote cluster, which is not the expected behavior, right?
I mean, I think it is. They've indicated that their waypoint, they put their waypoint in front of that service, and they've said that the waypoint is global. So by marking the service as local, they're saying traffic between the waypoint and service should always stay in the same cluster and should not fail over. And that contract is being upheld.
Yeah, but the contract, the service is not marked as global, right?
Exactly. So traffic between the waypoint and the service should not cross cluster boundaries, and it does not.
But it's not super intuitive, right? And the reason to mark the waypoint as global is because the same waypoint might serve multiple services.
I mean, when traffic goes through a waypoint, you don't know the ultimate service that the traffic is going to serve. There's a front-end service that you're resolving, which is causing the waypoint to be injected into the traffic flow, but the waypoint has the ability to change which service that traffic ultimately ends up with. So from the Z-tunnel perspective, once you've selected a service that has a waypoint, you have no idea whether the back-end service will be global or not.
I understand from the tunnel perspective that's the case, right? But what from the point of a user that configures the mesh, right? They indicated that the service is local. Would it be a reasonable or expected behavior for them when they observe that a request for a service that is local everywhere suddenly crosses cluster boundary?
I mean, that sounds consistent to me, given the way that waypoints work. You could say that traffic that goes to a service is going to have a given auth policy defined on it at L4, but as soon as you inject a waypoint, that auth policy has to change because what's happening at L4 changes. A waypoint fundamentally changes the traffic flow.
It changes the traffic flow. That's true. You have to send to a waypoint, right? But that's a different type of change of traffic flow. Like somebody has to enforce the policy and you say, I want a policy for this service, right?
Right.
We don't say in this case that we want this service to be global, and yet it is.
Well, so for instance, if you say, I want this service to only get traffic from client A at L4, and then you inject a waypoint, you need to change your L4 policy because your service is going to need to receive traffic from the waypoint identity. That has an impact. You're not able to just have them mismatch. And the same is true of service scope config. If you want your service to be local and your waypoint to be global, that's a logical configuration that we can serve.
But what this configuration is supposed to mean, What is this configuration supposed to mean?
It means that I can fail over when calling the waypoint to another cluster. So from ztunnel to waypoint, client ztunnel to waypoint, you might say, we have the ability to fail over. But on the second half of the connection, waypoint to backend ztunnel, we do not fail over to other clusters. Effectively, I want L4 failover only for that particular connection. Or conversely, a local waypoint with global backend services would be L7 failover only.
That sounds really difficult for a user to try to intuit, in my opinion. Like the user, as much as yes, the way waypoints are implemented, it is a distinct piece of infrastructure. I understand that. I don't know that, like, users think in terms of services. And so when they say this is a local service, what that intent is, I don't want this service to be reachable. I don't want this service to be reachable from things outside my cluster.
And it's not.
And having a
like, it will only be reached by waypoints in your local cluster. The question of what traffic gets to that waypoint is a second question. We're trying to connect two things that are orthogonal in the API and orthogonal in the traffic flow.
I mean, we can document this behavior, but I would argue that it's easy to understand this behavior when you know how things are implemented. It's slightly harder to understand this behavior when you don't know how things are implemented.
I agree with that. I do think that waypoints, like using waypoints in ambient architecture, requires an understanding of the fact that a waypoint changes the traffic flow. That's fundamental to the design of ambient. If you just set up ambient, have ztunnel everywhere, enable capture, and then write an L7 policy, that L7 policy will not be enforced because you need a waypoint to do the enforcement. You have to be aware of that aspect of the infrastructure. And that's true of authorization policy. That's true of service scope config. I can't think of a lot of scenarios where that's not true.
I agree that it changes the traffic flow. I just don't know that we want to. I think we can create a more intuitive behavior, which is what Michaela's sort of proposing here. Because again, like I was saying earlier, yes, a waypoint is a part of infrastructure. You need to know that it exists. But most users are creating a waypoint to get L7 functionality. They are not, like, when they think of where does this traffic come from, oh, I've got a waypoint in front of it, so therefore I've got to, it just feels like an extra step that we can make easier. So why wouldn't we make it easier?
How do you make it easier? I don't see, like, I see a lot of proposal for like implicit globalness or implicit localness, but that doesn't sound easier. That sounds a lot more complicated.
It's not implicit in the sense that if the user marks service as local, it will be local, regardless of whether there is a waypoint there or not.
Right. It's essentially making the waypoint more, a little bit more transparent, is the way I think about it. Or rather, it makes not transparent. It's making the waypoint respect and enforce service scope config. That's a better way of saying it.
The waypoint already respects it, so it's making the like client ztunnel respect it.
Yes.
The waypoint
Exactly.
is what you're proposing, I think.
It's
maybe
making
Yes,
the
exactly.
client ztunnel respect it based on a backend service that the client ztunnel is unaware of. You have to remember that service resolution happens twice when there's a waypoint in line. First by the ztunnel, and then by the waypoint. And
Yeah,
in this
but
case, we're saying
I see the argument that the client dialed a front-end service that has some scope. And the client ztunnel could respect the scope of that service that they dialed, or it can respect the scope of the service that is the waypoint. Both of them seem valid. From like a user perspective, can we just document that the scope of the waypoint is honored and that you should match it to the scope of the service?
Yeah, we absolutely can document that behavior, right? If we decide that that's a preferable outcome here.
I suppose the alternative would mean that waypoint service scope no longer has a meaning. Is that right?
It has some meaning, like even when waypoint service scope doesn't match the actual service scope, it still can give you options to send to a remote cluster. It's just you will be still constrained by the boundaries of the service. Like, for example, maybe one way to think about it, there is a waypoint service scope, and there is actual service scope that we want to contact. And they are two sets. And when they both come into play, you are limited to the intersection of those two sets.
That sounds like the most confusing option for a user to work out.
Yeah, because then you have, if you have a global L4 service, but a local waypoint. So maybe that's what we need to do is kind of treat this like a truth table. For L4 service resolution, you have both the L4 service that's resolved, as well as the waypoint that's potentially resolved. And they can agree or disagree. And we need to come up, we have a standard right now for what we do, which is you always accept the waypoint service scope. It has, you could say, precedence over the L4 service scope. The L4 service scope, or the service scope in that sense, only has relevance when it is in fact the back-end service which the waypoint has selected. That's our current state of the art. Question would be, does that need to change to be something else?
I'm for some reason just now thinking about this, and this might make things a lot simpler. It might make me change my mind on what we should do here. Which I should say, I'm thankful we're having this conversation, because regardless, we're going to be making an affirmative decision versus sort of backing into it. So I'm glad we're discussing this. But is the confused, like, if we tell users, hey, if you've got a global waypoint, but you've got a service behind it that you want to stay local, can they not just create a local waypoint just for that service?
They can. Like, the issue only arises if the service scope does not match the waypoint scope, right? And
Right.
You can work around it by creating more waypoints with different scopes.
That actually feels more. I think I'm with Mitch now. I think that feels a bit more like the way that we originally designed waypoints, like the namespace wide or waypoint behind in front of multiple services is sort of a simplicity and a cost effectiveness architecture. But even back when we were able to create, I think we did waypoints per service account in the day, there was always the idea that you would be able to get more granular with waypoint deployments as you had different use cases that arose. So using the waypoint, like treating the waypoint as infrastructure, ideally, I like to try to find ways to make that simpler for new users, because it's one of the biggest things that trips people up. And I'm looking at Slack threads and GitHub issues and things like that. So I want to try to make it simpler while we can, where we can. But it does seem like, as I'm listening to the traffic flow, it seems like the more consistent model is to respect the waypoint scope. And if we do that, even though it's not immediately intuitive to Grok, we have workarounds we can document, and we should document. I would even say we must document. And then as far as creating a local waypoint, and it actually might help people understand and set expectations better around waypoint. What do you think about that, Mike?
I mean, I can document it. I don't think I agree that this model is intuitive for the users, but I will
agree.
just
I
send
agree.
the
Not
PR
intuitive.
to.
I agree. It's not intuitive. That's where that's why I wanted to change it. So it's not intuitive, but is it more consistent? Do you think?
I don't understand what you mean by more consistent. If you mean like it fits in the current implementations, then yes, it is the current implementation. We don't need to change anything to make
I
it
mean
work.
consistent. I mean more consistent when it comes to how we think about waypoints and Istio and ambient.
It's hard to tell, right? Because the multi-cluster ambient is a relatively new thing, and it adds a different ways of thinking about how the infrastructure is supposed to work. Like as far as telemetry goes, like we show waypoints in some metrics and don't show them in another metrics, for example. So it's hard to talk about like some easy description of consistency when it comes to waypoints here.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to get at. Is like when it comes to telemetry, when it comes to off, like waypoints have separate identity. Can we come up with a model because multi-ambient, multi-cluster, multi-network is newer? Is there a model that has more or less, or the models have more or less harmony with the existing decisions that we've made? And if there is, I think we should try to lean toward the ones with a higher degree of consistency because it's less likely to break down. And I think the lack of consistency will be more confusing overall globally versus even though we might be able to make the multi-cluster story locally optimal. Sorry, Ian, I've been talking for a bit. You had your hand up.
No, I was just gonna mention that like this seems a little bit similar to how we initially implemented authorization policy for zTunnel, where it just like completely ignores the waypoint on the client side. And that's essentially has been a bug. It's still the current like default behavior because we shipped GA with it that way. But like realistically, you need to be able to enforce like an L4 style policy against the waypoint itself. So there's an option for that. And this feels like very similar of just saying like, oh, we're gonna ignore settings that apply to the waypoint itself in order to make it feel more transparent. And then we're gonna sort of back into a situation where that was a bad choice. And now we've got to like have another feature flag to enable doing what you've configured the waypoint to do. If that makes any sense.
I guess unless somebody wants to like share some other opinions, I think the consensus of this meeting is that we want to respect waypoint scope, not the front-end service scope.
I think that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I will keep some of the bugs related to this open until I like update some docs. But other than that, then I'll probably not going to change anything at the moment.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate your investigation and explanation here.
Yeah, thanks for digging into this.
Next up is Daniel with Dependabot.
Yeah, hopefully this isn't too controversial, but in PSWG, we've been discussing possible ways of trying to keep up with dependency, like in GoMod and various. In zTunnel, we currently have Dependabot set up, and it creates PRs for crate bumps. But in the Istio side, it creates security advisories that are kind of hidden away and requires somebody to go through and actually look at them and then open PRs to resolve. And I'm really not sure why the decision was made. There wasn't a lot of context in the PR that added it. So given that zTunnel is currently going, we are looking at extending that to Istio, and then also extending both of those to also cover the currently supported release branches. So that's just kind of where PSWG is standing, and kind of wanted to bring it to the community meeting to see how the community felt about them.
I like automation.
And just to be clear, Daniel, this would be sort of on existing maintainers to approve the bumps. So for Ztunnel, it's obvious we have the Ztunnel maintainers group. Do we know who owns the Go mod in Istio?
I believe it's a very limited set of largely TOC members that's set in the code owners, but that would only be for the master branches. For the release branches, it would go to the release managers to review and approve.
Gotcha. Okay. That's good to know. Yeah, you're right. It's me, Costin Lin, John, Stephen Landau, and John Hu.
Yes, Mike.
A minor question. Does Dependabot creates PRs when there is a vulnerability, or does it like just tracks the dependencies updates and creates PR on all of those?
I didn't limit it to one or the other, so it'll be either one.
But it's possible to like say update on vulnerabilities only.
It is possible, yes, but given that we have a large number of dependencies and we do a very bad job at picking them up, I didn't want to just limit it to security advisories only, because then we end up with something that got added, 2 years ago, hasn't been bumped since, and now we're doing a major bump, and potentially a patch release.
Or like if we are backporting to release branch, they probably need to bump during that.
Well, that's the dependent bot's going to keep it updated for the release branches itself, but keep not limiting it to security advisories. In my opinion, is a little smarter, because, like I said, if let's just say 127 is approaching end of life and it has a dependency on like OTEL from 2 years ago, and OTEL just had a CVE. Granted, we're not impacted by it, but it has a CVE, and now we're doing a major 2-year bump in a 127 patch release. That's a bad idea.
Yeah, makes sense.
Daniel, it sounds like you've got agreement there.
Okay. Well, the Ztunnel one's already been approved, so I'll just remove the do not merge labels and let them go through the normal review. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate it. We're not actually at time yet, but I just inserted one last thing. If you're going to be in Europe with us, please do sign up for Istio booth duty. And a big thanks to Mike Morris and Daniel Grimm, who have already signed up for booth duty. A lot of slots left to take. It is really a good thing if we can have 2 people there at any given point in time, in case one of us gets called away to, commercial booth duty or something along those lines. There's always surprises. Wait, Daniel Houghton won't be there, so I'm canceling. I'm not going. I'm done. Okay, I probably actually have to fly there, but Daniel, I'm bummed.
Yeah, the Contrib Fest talk didn't get approved, so unfortunately, Istio won't be presented where we actually kind of need it. So,
yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Our maintainer summit talk also didn't make it. So there were a lot of disappointments around talk acceptance, but I do think we've got some interesting stuff coming down the pipeline in the connectivity track in the main conference. So, all right. Well, with that, unless anyone else has something to bring up, we will see everybody next week.
Thanks. Cheers.